knock at the door from children with eyes of pure darkness, a vengeful ghost hunting in a primeval swamp, and an ancient predator stalking the lonely, man-made deserts of the oil fields. The vastness of Texas is not just a measure of distance. It's a measure of the unknown. It's a place where modern suburbs can intersect with ancient legends, and where our own industrial progress can stir things that were meant to be left sleeping in the earth. These stories remind us that even in our well-lit world, there are still vast pockets of darkness, places on the edge of the map where the old rules don't apply, and where you are very, very far from help. So the next time you find yourself on a lonely road at night, with nothing but the stars above you, remember these stories. And ask yourself, what else might be out here, watching you from the dark? If you have a creepy Texas story of your own, share it with us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed these tales, be sure to like and subscribe for more true horror. Until next time, stay safe and stay in the light. Our first story comes from a man named Mark, who lived with his wife, Sarah, in a quiet suburban home in Abilene, Texas. Their story taps into one of the most unsettling modern urban legends, a phenomenon that is reported all over the world, but seems to have a special affinity for the lonely roads and quiet neighborhoods of Texas. This is the story of the night they answered a knock at their door. And the last normal thing to happen that night was the sound of that knock. It was a Tuesday in late October, a night of howling wind and driving rain. Mark and Sarah were settled in for the night, watching a movie in their living room. Around 11 p.m., over the sound of the storm, they heard a firm, deliberate knock at their front door. Knock, knock, knock. They looked at each other, confused and annoyed. Who would be out in a storm like this, so late at night? Mark got up, assuming it was a neighbor in trouble. He went to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing on his porch, soaked by the rain, were two children, a boy and a girl, neither older than 10. They were wearing strange, slightly outdated clothing, the boy in a simple button-up shirt and slacks, the girl in a plain, homemade-looking dress. They stood perfectly still, their heads slightly bowed, their faces obscured by the shadows of the porch roof. Mark felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of primal fear wash over him. His instincts were screaming at him not to open the door. He decided to speak to them through the closed door. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice sounding louder than he intended in the quiet house. The boy's head lifted slowly. In a calm, eerily monotone voice that held no trace of fear or urgency, he said, "We need to use your phone. Our car broke down. Can you let us in?" Mark's feeling of dread intensified. Something was deeply wrong. He couldn't see their faces clearly, but their strange calmness in the middle of a storm was profoundly unnatural. "I'm sorry," Mark said. "I can't let you in, but I can make a call for you." "Who should I call?" There was a long pause. Then the girl spoke, her voice the same flat, emotionless monotone. "We need to come inside. You have to let us in." Her words weren't a plea. They were a statement of fact, almost a command. Mark felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain outside. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not opening the door." The boy looked up again, stepping closer to the door, into the light of the porch lamp. That's when Mark saw their eyes. And the sight would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. They had no iris, no sclera, no white at all. They were just two solid, bottomless orbs of pure pitch black. They were like the eyes of a great white shark, devoid of all emotion or humanity. Mark recoiled from the peephole, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sarah, call the police," he whispered, his voice trembling. He stood with his back against the door, listening. The children's demeanor on the other side of the door changed instantly. The calm, monotone voices were gone. A furious, frantic banging erupted on the door, so violent that the wood shuddered in its frame. And then he heard their voices again, but now they were distorted and filled with an inhuman rage. "You have to let us in?" they shrieked in unison. their voices sounding far too deep and powerful for children. "We are hungry. Let us in." Mark and Sarah huddled in their living room, listening to the relentless, violent assault on their front door and the demonic, screeching demands of the things on their porch. The banging continued for what felt like an eternity, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. Mark crept back to the peephole and looked out. The porch was empty. The rain was still pouring down, but the children were gone. When the police arrived a few minutes later, they found no one. They searched the entire neighborhood. There were no reports of a broken-down car, no missing children. And despite the muddy, rain-soaked yard, there were no footprints on the porch or leading up to the house at all. It was as if the two black-eyed children had never been there. But Mark and Sarah knew they were real, and they knew that for some reason that night, they had been chosen and had only narrowly escaped letting a nightmare into their home. Our second story takes us deep into the heart of East Texas, to a place known as the Big Thicket. It's not a single forest, but a massive, sprawling collection of forests, swamps, and bayous that covers hundreds of square miles. It is a place of stunning biodiversity, but also a place of deep, dark, and often terrifying folklore. It's a primeval landscape that feels ancient and indifferent to human life. This story is from a man named Dale, an experienced hunter who got lost in the thicket one evening and encountered something that was not on any map. The sun was setting, and in the Big Thicket, the darkness doesn't just fall. It rises from the swamp to swallow you whole. Dale had been hunting deer in a section of the thicket he thought he knew well. But as dusk began to settle, he realized he had become disoriented. Every direction looked the same. A dense, tangled wall of cypress, pine, and twisted vines. A light, cool mist began to rise from the damp ground, further confusing his senses. A feeling of unease began to creep in. He knew the stories. He knew that people who got lost in the thicket sometimes were never found again. As the last of the daylight faded, he saw a light in the distance. It was a single, glowing orb, like a lantern, floating about 6 feet off the ground, weaving slowly between the trees. He knew of the Big Thicket light, a local will-o'-the-wisp phenomenon that was often seen in the swamps. Relieved, he assumed it was a sign of a road or another hunter. He began to walk towards it, crashing through the underbrush. But the light wasn't leading him to safety. It was luring him deeper into the heart of the swamp and further away from any hope of rescue. He followed the light for what felt like an hour, but it always remained just out of reach. He was now hopelessly lost, wading through knee-deep, stagnant water. The air was thick with the smell of decay. The light finally flickered and died, plunging him into near-total darkness. It was then that he heard the sound. It was the sound of a woman, humming a soft, sad lullaby. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once. He called out, "Is anyone there?" The humming stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. He couldn't even hear crickets or frogs. It was as if the entire swamp was holding its breath. He stood frozen in the dark, cold water, his hunting rifle held tight against his chest. He was an experienced hunter, a man at the top of the food chain. But in that moment, he felt like prey, and he knew with a terrifying certainty that he was the one being hunted. He began to hear movement in the water around him, a soft splashing, as if something large was circling him in the darkness, just beyond his sight. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel it. He could feel a presence in the water with him, a deep, ancient malevolence that made the hair on his arms stand up. The legends of the thicket flooded his mind, stories of the Kaintuck, the ghosts of murderous river pirates who were said to haunt the swamps, and darker, older stories of creatures that were neither man nor beast. Then he heard a voice, a dry, raspy whisper that sounded like it came from right behind his ear. It spoke a single guttural word in a language he didn't understand. Dale didn't wait to hear another. He let out a yell and began to blindly run, crashing through the water and tangled roots, not caring where he was going, only caring about getting away from that voice, from that presence in the water. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, finally collapsing on a patch of solid ground. He lay there, exhausted and terrified, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the thick canopy of trees. He eventually found his way to a logging road and was rescued later that day. He never told the other hunters the full story of what happened, of the light that lured him, or the voice that spoke to him in the dark. But he never hunted in the big thicket again. He knew he had trespassed on a place that did not belong to him and had barely escaped the ancient thing that guards it. Our final story takes us to the vast, desolate landscape of the Permian Basin in West Texas. This is the heart of oil country, a man-made desert of drilling rigs, dirt roads, and the endlessly nodding steel horses known as pump jacks. During the day, it's a place of incredible industry. At night, it becomes one of the most alien and isolated landscapes on Earth. This story comes from a man named Ben, who worked as a pumper, a job that required him to drive alone all night, checking the wells scattered across a massive, empty lease. The oil field was his kingdom. But one night, he discovered he was sharing it with something that had been there long before the first well was ever drilled. Ben's job was lonely but simple. He drove his pickup truck from well to well, checking gauges and making sure the pump jacks were running smoothly. The rhythmic ka-chunk of the pumps was the only sound for miles, a mechanical heartbeat in the deep silence of the desert night. He had been doing the job for years and was used to the solitude. He'd seen coyotes, owls, and strange tricks of the light, but he'd never seen anything that truly scared him. Until that night, he was driving towards a distant well around 2 a.m. when he saw something strange. Perched on the very top of the pump jack's walking beam, the part that rhythmically moves up and down, was a figure. It was silhouetted against the bright moon, and from a distance, it looked impossibly large and out of place. It looked almost like a massive bird or a person with huge, folded wings. He slowed his truck, squinting. He told himself it was just a strange shadow, or maybe a large piece of equipment a maintenance crew had left behind. But as the pump jack dipped down, the figure remained perfectly balanced, and it seemed to turn its head to watch his approaching truck. A wave of unease washed over him. He decided to skip that well and move on to the next one in his rotation. As he drove away, he kept looking in his rearview mirror until the strange silhouette was gone. He tried to shake the feeling, but the image was burned into his mind. An hour later, he was at another well, about 5 miles away from the first one. He finished his checks and was about to get back in his truck when he felt that familiar prickling on the back of his neck. He slowly looked up at the pump jack he was standing next to, and there it was, the same figure, perched on the beam, which was now slowly rising and falling just a few hundred feet away from him. It was closer now, and he could see it more clearly. It wasn't a bird. It was humanoid, but tall and painfully thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. And what he had thought were folded wings now looked like a tattered cloak, or perhaps actual leathery wings wrapped around its body. It was completely still except for its head, which was tracking his every movement. The oil field suddenly felt very small, and the endless miles between him and the safety of town felt like an impossible distance. He was being hunted. Panic set in. Ben jumped in his truck and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust. He didn't look back. He drove straight to the next well on his list, his mind racing. Was he hallucinating? Was it a prank? He pulled up to the third well, his heart pounding. He didn't even get out of the truck. He just stared at the pump jack. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from behind the massive counterweight of the pump, the figure slowly, deliberately, unfolded itself and stood up. It was on the ground now, not 50 yards from his truck. It was impossibly tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and as it stood to its full height, the moonlight caught its face. It had no discernible features, just a pale, smooth surface, and 2 large, dark pits that looked like eyes. Ben screamed and slammed his truck into reverse. As he sped away, he looked in his side mirror and saw the thing take a step towards the road. It didn't run. It just began to walk, its long, slow strides covering the ground with an unnatural speed. Ben drove for his life, not stopping, not looking back, until he hit the main highway. He quit his job the next day. The other pumpers called him crazy, but Ben knows what he saw. He believes the relentless, rhythmic drilling, the constant pulling of oil from deep within the earth, had awakened something ancient, something that considered the dark, mechanical desert its own private hunting ground. This Wednesday night, just past 9 p.m. here in my part of the world, is a time when cities are still alive with light and sound. But it's a world away from the vast, lonely landscapes of Texas, where the darkness can feel absolute and the silence can stretch for 100 miles. The kind of fear we're exploring tonight knows no borders. It's the fear of the unknown, the unexplained, and the things that lurk just beyond the reach of our porch lights. Tonight, we're heading back to the Lone Star State for 3 allegedly true stories born from its unique and often terrifying landscape. These are tales from ordinary people who found themselves face to face with an extraordinary darkness. We'll answer a knock at the door from children who aren't what they seem, get lost in a primeval forest where the ghosts of the past still hunt, and work a lonely night shift in the oil fields. And something ancient has been awakened by the rhythmic drone of machines. So settle in and listen closely, because in Texas, the wide open spaces aren't always empty.